Okay, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and see so many people in the room. Today I'm presenting my doctoral research that is treatment fidelity in the VERSE trial, and I'd like to acknowledge the very kind support of my supervisors, Associate Professor Natalie Ciccone and Associate Professor Erin Gadecki, who you heard from earlier, and also my Edith Cowan University colleagues in the room. Participants received 45 minutes of speech-language therapy by a certified speech pathologist. This is something that we see frequently written in journal articles in our field and across many behavioural interventions. I think the clinicians in the room would agree that we can't implement this treatment based on that description. And many researchers as well would agree. Can't be confident that the therapist was trained in the treatment. We can't be confident that all participants received the same therapy, and we don't know if what actually happened in the therapy was what the researchers intended when they designed the study. So these are all aspects that treatment fidelity is concerned with. It's some research jargon. So treatment fidelity incorporates these 4 aspects as per Feld's model from 2004. And the ones I'm going to focus on today are treatment integrity, which is adherence to protocol. So was what was intended when the study was designed actually given? And then also, were the treatments sufficiently different enough between usual care and then the intervention that was given? And this is difficult for behavioural interventions because we don't necessarily know how our treatments work, and we don't know the exact mechanisms of action. So as opposed to maybe a drug trial, which that can be more easily looked at. So we looked at the reporting of treatment fidelity in aphasia randomised control trials and found that 21% explicitly used the words treatment fidelity. And within those, 31% looked at adherence to protocol, and 83% looked at session dosage, but this was in terms of minutes of the session. And I think we all know that not every therapy minute is equal, so we can look a bit more in depth at how we can reconceptualise dosage. Erin talked about VERSE this morning, and this is where I've got my data from. And the take-home message being that more intensive therapy was not better in that early period. So the therapy fidelity included in the VERSE trial was the gold standard that we have and really unprecedented. Therapist training, therapy manuals, each therapist recording 4 sessions that the therapy fidelity monitor reviewed. There was a therapy fidelity coordinator who oversaw the whole process, and feedback was given to clinicians while they were giving that 20 sessions of therapy so that they could alter anything that they needed to be more adherent to the protocol. And so that was done at that macro level, and I used the VERSE video recordings to look at an utterance level therapy fidelity. So I randomly selected 53 videos from all of the videos that were included within the intensive arms from the VERSE trial, transcribed them, and coded behaviours. So I then used a checklist to look at adherence to protocol, therapist behaviours, including cueing and feedback, the dosage that the participant received at an utterance level in terms of the number of correct verbal responses that they had, the number of errors made, and then some descriptives on the terms of the types of tasks and materials. This is an example of 1/3 of the checklist for a session, some measures of dosage, and also some of the measures that the SALT software gives, such as MLU. And for the therapist behaviours, the number of times cues were used with success, so this session 97 times, so that's quite high, the number of cues used, and the type of feedback given. And I'll be presenting results on this. So I typed 235,000 words, I watched 149 therapy tasks, and 46 hours of therapy, I saw 12,000 errors made from people with aphasia, and this is what I looked like at the end. But seriously, it was a privilege to look at this data, and it doesn't look like it from that photo, but, and I think after you graduate, you don't get a lot of opportunity to observe other clinicians at work, and so I felt really privileged to be able to do that and just watch what other therapists did. So what I learned about people with aphasia, this is basically the same sort of pattern trend line here that Erin presented, which was that people get better. So from baseline to 3 months to 6 months, across all of the severities, people with aphasia got better. And you can see that they all sort of follow that same line. And I wanted to know what was happening in these sessions that would be predictive of the WAB AQ score at 6 months post-stroke. So, on average, people with aphasia are making 228 errors per session. They were self-correcting about 15% of the time. They said 1,689 words during the session across 479 utterances on average. So 28% of what they were saying in the session had errors. So this gives us an idea of that level of dosage, more so just than what we might think of in terms of the minutes of a session. In terms of their error profiles, so actually it was the people who were diagnosed at moderate at baseline who made the most errors across both error types, sentence level errors and word level errors. But it was also the people who were moderate severity that had the highest number of utterances per minute. So I think clinically we can see this in that there's a bit of an efficiency trade-off. The people with aphasia who were at moderate severity were saying more, they were trying for more, but they were making more mistakes. So they hadn't got to that more mild level where they were able to self-monitor and also be more efficient with what they were saying. And so you can see in the blue the moderate severity as well. For many of the error categories had the highest number of errors: filled and unfilled pauses, phonemic errors, circumlocution, semantic errors, and so on. So in a linear regression model, controlling for how severe they were at baseline and also the amount of intervention that they received, there were three of the things that I looked at that came out as predictive of their WAB score at 6 months after stroke, and that was the number of verbal utterances that they said during a session, the percent of the total words with errors, and the number of cues used with success by the therapist. So if they said more verbal utterances in any given session, if the therapist had more success with eliciting the target response with a cue, and if they had less percentage of their total words with errors, that was predictive of a better score at 6 months post-stroke as per the WAB AQ. So I learned that therapists could adhere to the protocol, and 98% of therapist utterances adhere to the VERSE protocol. In terms of the main active ingredients that we were looking at here at the utterance level, which was, did the therapist use the same cue that was ineffective twice in a row? And did they allow the person with aphasia to make more than 3 errors on the same target in a row? So most of the time they weren't doing this as per VERSE protocol. 98% of the utterances adhered to that. And Erin also presented this slide. So therapists were eclectic, particularly in usual care. So across the 25 videos that I looked at, there were 96 tasks in total, 51 different tasks, an average of 3.8 tasks per session. You can see in that picture on the left, the Wordle picture comes out as the most common word in terms of the tasks. So 57% of tasks were single word level, using pictures or picture naming. I think this is also something that we would expect. Therapists did the majority of the talking during the session, so total utterances, they had more total utterances than the patients, more total words. On average, there were 82 cues used in a session. and they were successful 40% of the time in eliciting the target response. So if we unpack that a little, the most common cues used were direct model, phonological, semantic, and so on. But in terms of what was most effective, there's a change in the order. So direct model, still most effective, but you can see phonological a bit further down there at 40% of the time when it was used, it got the correct response. And semantic all the way down at the bottom. So we're using semantic cueing a lot, but it's actually the least effective in terms of what I looked at from this data set. So this is how we looked at dosage within this sample. So as opposed to thinking about minutes, we looked at utterance level dosage, and this is more akin with the motor learning research, where it's the number of reps, or if you think about going to the gym, the number of reps that you do. So what was the number of reps that people were doing within the treatments? So on average, 307 utterances, 228 errors. So some of this was from before. And what we wanted to know was, were the two intervention groups, the usual care plus and verse, were they different in terms of the within session dosage? And they didn't come out as statistically significantly different. So the within session dosage at an utterance level was not statistically significantly different between the two. So what does all of this mean? Well, it adds a lot more meaning to the verse trial results and utilises all of that data that we've got to really unpack it a bit more and know what was happening in the interventions. We can see that there's high treatment integrity, so the therapists adhered to the protocol. The within session dosage level wasn't different, and it gives us a quantitative picture for dosage of a typical aphasia therapy session. I'd like to acknowledge the following people. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for Emily? Whichever's faster.
That's a commendable job what you're doing. Actually, I would like to ask you, with a lot of migrated people in Australia, do you see bilingual population and you have considered them if you have seen code switching, code mixing with the people who are aphasic, and the therapist taking the bilingual physical therapy, or you are sticking to only English, Australian or British English? So that's my one question.
So about whether the therapy was in English or...
Yeah. Two different British and Australian English. With that, if you have some population which is bilingual, other than English, if you have seen them, they are mixing or they're switching, and then how do you work on treatment fidelity, or you have kind of strict protocol to be followed? Because it's pretty like kind of dicey question. How do you give therapy in bilingual?
Yeah, so within the trial, the therapy had to be conducted in English. So all the videos that I watched were in English, but some people did have other languages that came through, but yeah, so it was all conducted in English that I transcribed, so that's sort of all that I can comment on, but yeah.
Question from Emma, and then I think we'll save other questions for Juanita.
Oh, I was just kind of annoyed because I like semantic cues, so I don't want to change my practice based on this evidence. But I'm assuming it's really hard to teach as well, cueing. I was wondering, you said you accounted for different types of aphasia, or where there would be, someone. I mean, this is the perennial thing of whether or not someone with a semantic impairment would benefit from semantic cues, or whether they're not. I know that there's still literature out there that's saying that that's difficult, but you accounted for that?
Yeah, I've got, I'm actually in the process of looking at the classifications of aphasia as per the WAB, and then I'll break that down and see, but pretty much universally semantic cueing, yeah.
Thank you everyone, and thank you to our amazing presenters this morning for this